Well, thank you so much for coming in today to talk with me about this topic, Taylor. I think Black loyalism is such a critical topic in history, especially today, and you even prepared notes for me.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I feel like this is a conversation that should be had more often, and it certainly pertains to Canadian history for sure. So let's start off, first of all, by defining what a Black loyalist is in loose terms. So a Black loyalist can be thought of as an enslaved Black person living in the United States during the American Revolutionary War, who fought for the British during the war because they were promised freedom afterwards. So many Black loyalists resettled in Nova Scotia after they were granted their freedom.
So, the loyalist component of the term refers to the loyalty of these Black people towards the British monarchy.
Right. So, I do believe that this is often misinterpreted. So, I would argue that although the term may be misleading, Black loyalists did not fight in the American Revolutionary War because they were loyal to the British. I think the loyalism component of the term really just refers to, or should refer to, how they were loyal to them in battle. That doesn't necessarily mean that their attitudes reflected this as well. So both sides mutually benefited from enslaved Black people serving in the war. So I see Black loyalists more like freedom seekers. They were taking charge of their own emancipation. They were acting in the best interest to survive.
Okay. But how did these Black loyalists know that the British would actually fulfill their promise? How were they so sure that they were going to be free after the war, if they even survived?
Yeah, well, let's take Boston King as an example. So I've studied him a nice bit. So in his memoirs, he recounts being abused by his master as early as the age of 6. So he was essentially born into slavery. So for people like him, this was really the only option. This was a sacrifice that was worth making in hopes that they would eventually get freedom.
Didn't he rename himself Boston King in honor of King George III?
This has been speculated. I did read the article where that is mentioned. But certainly Boston King's lengthy memoirs, and I did read all of them, show no loyalties to the British. He really only states the fact that he is grateful that he had that opportunity. He doesn't necessarily credit the British for freeing him by any means.
Okay, so how are Black loyalists related to Canada then? Why did they come here?
Right, so the British provided the Black loyalists with passage to Nova Scotia. So there were many Black settlements that arose as a result, Birchtown being one of them, and this is the one that Boston King lived in. So Canada was thought of as kind of like a promised land where they could become autonomous and start completely fresh and just be free from the slave society that existed in the United States.
Right. So did it actually turn out this way?
Well, they were not able to really create a viable life that could have sustained them long term. They were able to escape the slave society in the United States, but unfortunately, Birchtown did not offer what they needed. So settling in Canada was not the promised land that many of them had hoped for. Like most Black settlements in Canada, Birchtown really only saw a small degree of temporary success. And because of this, they weren't able to stay. So Boston King explains in his memoirs that every family had their own lot of land and that everyone had to pitch in to build huts before winter set in when they arrived.
So, what's wrong with that? It sounds like they were off to a good start at least.
Right, so the government provided Black loyalists with rations for the first year that they lived there. And, after that, it was just, they struggled. They were not able to even have subsistence farming where they were able to just produce enough crops to sustain their families. So Boston King explains in his memoirs that people started selling clothes off their backs and blankets off their beds just to sustain themselves and to pay for food. So circumstances deteriorated so badly that he even recalls people dropping dead in the streets because they were starved to death. So this wasn't even just in Birchtown, this was all over Nova Scotia, so it was very widespread.
It sounds awful.
Yeah.
How did they try to overcome that?
Well, people like Boston King, they eventually had to seek work elsewhere, so they had to start working for other people. So Boston King, he was able to make a living in the fishing industry for a while. He was building boats, and he even did do some fishing himself. But he was able to make a living for a while, and he even says that it was his best winter in Birchtown. It did sustain him enough. That was enough for him at the time.
So what happened after that? Was that enough to make him stay?
No. So he actually moved to another black settlement at this time. I don't think it was because of money or anything like that, because the fishing industry, like he said, it did help him in a great degree. But yeah, he moved to a black settlement called Preston, which was also in Nova Scotia, and it was there that he really began becoming interested in Christianity and teaching Christianity.
Was he able to stay there, working as a preacher?
No. So I believe that he could have. He mentions in his memoirs that he thought his teachings would be more valuable to Africans. So he really thought that it would be more beneficial to them than, say, people in Nova Scotia.
Why did he think that?
I think really he credits it to the fact that this is what allowed him to persevere throughout all these years. So I guess he just really wanted to pass it along to other African people or descendants of African people. Yeah, so it allowed him to persevere through his struggle. So I guess he wanted the same for other people that were living in Africa, for example.
So he wanted to become a Christian missionary. How did he do that?
Yeah, well, like we mentioned, he learned most of what he knew in Preston. His wife was actually recently converted to Christianity. So yeah, he thought that this was a great opportunity, and he did have some experience teaching Christianity in Preston, but he had bigger goals that he wanted to accomplish.
How do you think this all ties in with Black loyalism?
Right, so Black loyalism is a term that was designed to describe loyalty to the British in battle only. I don't believe that it reflects loyalty to the British as a whole. So Black loyalists constantly took risks to emancipate themselves from slavery and oppression. Fighting in the American Revolutionary War was a huge part of that, of course.
Sure, so how does this all relate to their resettlement in Sierra Leone? They were trying to establish better lives for themselves, but they were not escaping slavery at that point.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. They weren't escaping slavery. They accomplished that by settling in Nova Scotia. But their resettlement in Sierra Leone shows that they took whatever steps were necessary. They just wanted to continuously. They wanted to emancipate themselves in whatever way they could, and whatever opportunities were best suited for them, they took. So they had the same motivations when they fought for the British in the war. So they chose to accept these challenges by hoping that they would eventually give them what they wanted, give them the life that they deserved.
I never really thought of that before. I think that's a nice way of putting it. I like the fact that this perspective paints them as heroes in their own story.
That's how I like to see it. We see this throughout history beyond the American Revolutionary War as well. Yeah, I think believing otherwise just diminishes the sacrifices that they made.
Definitely. Thank you so much for this today, Taylor. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.